It's no secret that I love Delta Force Hawk Ops. Before I got to play the technical test, I didn't care about it. I'd seen some gameplay, I'd seen the trailers, and I thought it looked kind of cheap. I thought it was going to be one of these throwaway extraction shooters that get boring really quick. But I was so wrong. As soon as I got to play it, I got absolutely sucked in. And as someone that really enjoyed DMZ at first, but then has been kind of looking for something to scratch that itch for quite a while now, this feels like it's the game. This feels like the thing that DMZ players have been waiting for. And even more than that, over the last couple of days, I've started playing the other mode, the kind of big team mode in the game, and I think this might be the game that Battlefield fans have been waiting for too. I was one of those people that used to love Battlefield, especially like Bad Company 2, and then when Battlefield 2042 came out, I felt so disappointed. Like, I really didn't enjoy that game at all. But Delta Force Hawk Ops feels like the game Battlefield 2042 should have been. It just feels perfect for that kind of shooter, and obviously they've taken a lot of inspiration from Battlefield. You might even say that they've copied some things from Battlefield. But regardless, they've made the game that EA should have, and I think that EA are going to be having a pretty hard time to top this when they release the new Battlefield next year. But despite how positive I've been about Delta Force, it's not perfect. There are some things that I don't like about it, there's some things that I'm worried about the direction it might take. So I thought in this video, that'll be my last one probably about the technical test, because that's ending tomorrow morning, I'm going to go through the good things about Delta Force Hawk Ops and the bad things about it. I'm going to be talking about both game modes, and I'm going to be completely honest here. I'm not one of these content creators that thinks developers should listen to me. I don't think developers should try and make the game that I want to play. But I do want to give some feedback, and I want to make sure that I share my criticisms as well as all the praise I've been giving this game. Let me know what you think in the comments, and let me know if you have any other questions about the game. Now I've spent a huge amount of time in the game, I think I've got a pretty good idea of what it's like. Quick disclaimer though, this is all based on the technical test. It's a pre-alpha version. I know it's really early. There are definitely some problems with that. So everything I'm talking about could change. They might have fixed everything already. Who knows? But I have kind of kept that in mind with the feedback that I'm going to give. So let's start with the good. The first thing, and I've said this a bunch of times, the gunplay is amazing. It feels really good. Every single gun that I've used so far has felt super satisfying. I don't really know what it is, whether it's something to do with the hit markers, whether it's something to do with the bullet velocity, the animations, the muzzle flash, the audio. I've got no idea. There's so many FPS games that just don't get this right. The guns feel like weak or anemic, there's no sense of impact, but this game has absolutely nailed it. To a point where it feels like Call of Duty, which is high praise when you're talking about gunplay. Whatever you think about Call of Duty, the guns feel really satisfying to use. It's something that's kind of made Call of Duty and Battlefield stand out, I think. And I would say Delta Force Hawk Ops is at least up to Call of Duty's level in this regard. Secondly, progression feels great in both modes. So there's tons of different ways you can progress. There's XP, just sort of leveling up, and then you unlock new things as you level up. You can level up guns if you're in the big team battle mode. You can't do that in the extraction shooter. You also unlock loads of things through challenges. You can unlock new weapon skins and things like that, including some from doing Easter eggs. Check out the Easter egg video on my channel if you want to see that. I opened up a bunch of bunkers. We've got quite a lot of the Easter egg rewards already, so that's pretty cool. But yeah, there's a ton of different ways to do it. Within the extraction shooter, you also get to level up your base. Obviously, you keep on improving your gear. This is really the main way that I think the game beats DMZ. The big thing that I always said was missing from DMZ was progression. You know, pretty much straight away in DMZ, you could go in with a loadout gun, so with the best gun in the game, and it didn't take you very long to get like 3 plate armor and a large backpack just within a game. You know, you could easily get those things in 5 minutes if you knew what you were doing, especially when they were super easy to craft for those few weeks. But it never really felt like you were progressing in DMZ. I never really felt like I was gaining a huge amount by completing a raid in DMZ. Sometimes I'd complete some missions, but then the missions never really got more exciting in DMZ. And sometimes you'd end up getting some of the upgrades, like what they added quite later on, where, you know, you'd have all those things where it'd be like, oh, you now bring more armor into the raid or something like that. And although those additions were nice, it felt like too little and too late. Within Delta Force Hawk Ops, within the extraction mode, the hazard operations, there's so many different ways you're constantly progressing. And whenever you complete a raid, if you've managed to get out stuff, you can look to see whether you can use it for crafting, you can sell it on the auction house, you can just sell it back to the vendors to make a bunch of money. There are some problems with the missions and stuff that I will talk about later, but it really feels like you're gaining something if you have a good raid in a game, if you come out on top of a good firefight. And that's something that I just don't think there ever was in DMZ. I was never excited to find a good weapon in DMZ because I could have just made that weapon myself. Another point for the pros is that maps are interesting in both modes. I've played on all of the maps in Hazard Operations, there's 2 so far, and there's kind of the confidential version and the normal version that feel very, very similar. Maybe the bots are a bit harder in the confidential mode, I'm not really sure. But the maps for the extraction shooter feel super interesting. They're not like DMZ in terms of being, you know, huge war zone maps where you can drive around in vehicles and stuff. They're much smaller, they're like 3 or 4 points of interest normally, or at least the 2 that we've played. But all of those points of interest feel unique, they feel different from each other, and you have different kinds of fights depending on where you are. The Zero Dam map has lots of kind of close quarters engagements and medium range engagements, and then the other map, Leali Grove, has lots of long distances, so you get a lot more sniping and stuff like that. I really like the variety in the map so far. I think they're super interesting, and in the big team battle mode as well, the maps feel super different from each other. One of them has this huge mountain that the attackers are trying to ascend and then fighting through tunnels up at the top, and then the other one is this sort of quite dense desert town where you've got lots of kind of hopping over walls and rooftops and having some real close quarters fights, while tanks and big armored vehicles go around the bigger streets. It just feels awesome. It feels like some of the best maps from Battlefield, and that's pretty high praise. The next positive, and there are a lot of positives on this list, the graphics are great. I wouldn't say it's the best graphics ever, you know, it doesn't look as good as something like Grey Zone Warfare, but it's also nowhere near as taxing as Grey Zone Warfare. When I have the graphics set to medium or high, I easily get 120 frames a second on my 3080, which is admittedly still quite a good graphics card, but, you know, it's not top of the range or anything like that. And this is a technical test when I'm sure there'll be more optimization to come. There have been some like graphical glitches and stuff. Some of you have noticed in some of my videos, there's some textures popping in and out and stuff like that. I put that down just to the fact that it's a technical test. I'm sure they'll fix that stuff. But when it is all working right, I think the game looks really good. And a big part of that is the kind of art direction and the aesthetic of it. It's something that lots of the best games get away with, where you can have an engine that's not maybe that technically demanding, and it's not that demanding on people's hardware, but it looks really good just because it's got a cool art style, or it's just got a really nice lighting model that makes everything look nice. I'm not sure exactly what it is that they've done, but all the maps look super colourful, super vibrant, but they're very easy to read. It's very easy to see where you can and can't go, and they look really interesting. It's also got a very sort of unique look about it. I've seen people saying, oh, it looks like Arena Breakout, or it looks like Battlefield 2042, but to me, if you see a screenshot of this game, I think you know what it is. There's something about the colour palette, something about the geometry of everything that just looks quite distinct, and I really, really like it. It's also really good if it doesn't push the boat out too much in terms of demanding too much of hardware. That means that more people will be able to play it. They have already said that they're going to release this on the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One, so I'm assuming people who are maybe on PC hardware that's a little bit older will still be able to play this at a decent frame rate. Kind of linked to the way it looks, I also want to praise the UI. After we've had some terrible UIs in games like Battlefield 2042 and the recent Call of Duties, I think the UI in this is great. It already has features like leaderboards and rank systems, it has a friends list that actually works already, even in a technical test. Even the ranking system works in a technical test, so you can check the leaderboard, and then anyone on the leaderboard, you can quickly go look at their profile, look at their last few games and the stats for them, look at their overall stats. It's just super easy to use. All of the things like how to manage your inventory and your stash in the extraction mode, super simple. There's buttons to kind of auto order them. You can get to vendors really easily. You can get to missions very easily. When you're trying to modify a weapon, so you're trying to sort of make your loadout, that's super easy to control. It's not perfect. There's a couple of things I'd like being able to change your loadouts in a match of the big team mode. But other than that, it really is super solid already. And again, I think it looks really nice. It uses up the entire screen really well, and I've never really had times where I've struggled to find something. There's a couple of like weird little bits at the moment, like there's some text missing. Sometimes when you hover over an icon, it won't tell you what it's meant to do. But I think that's part of the reason that the alpha test has been delayed. I think they want to try and get those things right, so they're just going to fix those little text issues. But that's all stuff that's easy to fix. The core UI seems absolutely solid. And another thing that's great, we've still got like 8 more of these to go. There's a lot of things that are good. The audio is pretty great. I would say it's not quite up there with Battlefield. Some of the Battlefield games, particularly like Battlefield 1 and Battlefield 5, sounded absolutely incredible. I wouldn't say it's quite up to that level, but it does feel a little bit better than Call of Duty. The guns all sound really solid. Some of the sniper rifles are definitely loud and quite like exciting to use. The abilities sound great, and the abilities have really unique sounds. So you can tell straight away, oh, there's a recon arrow going overhead, or somebody's using one of the sonar devices, or somebody's just used the overdrive. Like, you can tell all of these things even just after a few hours of playing, and that's absolutely awesome. The level of polish for a technical test is absolutely insane. Like I said, there's a couple of minor text issues and some graphical bugs, but for a technical test, this feels much more polished than most AAA games that I play when they come out, particularly multiplayer games and like live service games. I would say this feels more polished than Battlefield 2042 did at release. It feels more polished than the Call of Duty games do at release. There's just more features that are complete. There's more things that just work. Like I said, the friends list works, the leaderboards work, the ranking systems work, the progression works. It just all feels super polished, and I'm kind of impressed with that. They have said that they've been working on this game for 4 years already, but they are also predominantly a mobile developer. So for their first sort of big PC launch that I'm aware of at least, I think they've done an amazing job. Now we'll get on to a few more controversial things that I actually really like about the game. The first one is the operator powers. I've seen lots of people who I don't think have played the game complaining about these, because it was a big complaint about Battlefield 2042, saying that the operator powers didn't have a place in this kind of game. I think they really do. I think they're really solid. Now, I am somebody that, while I didn't love the stuff in Battlefield 2042, I didn't care about it. I did really enjoy the powers that you could get in Black Ops 4, so take this with a grain of salt if you need to, but I think they make fights much more interesting. So far, I've seen people at all levels, even the best players in this technical test, using all of the different characters available. They all seem super useful, and I haven't had a gunfight where I thought, oh, okay, it's because they used this ability, that's why they won. None of them feel cheesy, none of them feel broken. They just sort of stretch the gameplay out a little bit. So, you know, when you get into a fight with someone, maybe there'll be some smoke grenades going off so they can cover up what they're doing and they'll be moving, and you know they'll be healing if they're throwing loads of smokes like that. You'll see some recon arrows going over. Maybe people will use things like the electric arrows to block off a certain path. Sometimes you'll see the hacking on the side of the screen, so you know someone will be aware of how many people are in your team or how many people are with you and kind of the closest route to you. You hear all of these little things, and there's kind of ways to counter all of them, or at least if you're aware of what they're doing, you can play a little bit differently, and I think that's super important. It's not like anyone just has a button that lets you get a kill or anything like that. A little one is that the vehicles feel great in the multiplayer mode. I think driving the vehicles feels awesome. I haven't had a chance to fly a helicopter yet, but I've seen other people flying them and doing incredible things like diving into cover when someone's got a rocket launch sort of lock onto them, things like that. I think the vehicles feel really great and they look really great. Remember in Battlefield 2042 when you'd see the vehicles kind of stuttering about and the animation looking terrible from a distance? There's none of that. Everything looks absolutely awesome all the time. Now, another big controversial one is I think the use of bots is great. They actually seem like real players. I've been playing a ton of the multiplayer mode today, the big team mode, and as far as I could tell, there was only like 30 people playing the game in total when I looked on Steam charts. But I was in games with like 60 people on, so at least half of them were definitely bots, probably more than that because some people were in extraction games, and I was aware that there was at least 2 games going on at a time because I was playing at the same time as Stod, and I was only in a couple of games with him. But there were other games where we must have been in different games. So I assume the majority of players I was playing against today were AI. They were bots, but they were acting like real players. They were using all of the support abilities, they were taking cover, they were pushing all together. Sometimes they were giving up on an objective and deciding to go and flank round to get the other objective. I get the impression there's a lot of kind of the bots are secretly assigned to a player and they will follow and support a certain player. But But that's fine. Like, I think a lot of real players do that too. Even in the extraction mode, where I'd assume it's a lot more complicated to program AI to seem realistic. Me and Stod were playing in one game, and there was a bot on our team who we didn't know was a bot until right near the end of the match, when he started trying to walk through a door that was shut. Like, that's incredible that we were playing with someone that we just assumed was someone without a mic, but it turned out that they were actually AI. I think it's really good that if the player population's a little bit low, or if there's maybe players who have a low skill level and the game thinks, okay, they're going to suffer if you put them into the general population, we're going to put them in lobbies with a few more bots. I think that's absolutely awesome. Today in the extraction mode, there aren't any bots in the special sort of confidential mode, and it meant that I was waiting for like half an hour for a game. I would have much rather been able to jump into a game with a bunch of bots, to be honest. Even if it meant I got loads of kills that didn't really matter because, you know, they were against bots. I don't care. I still would have had a better time than as opposed to just waiting around and not being able to find a game at all. Now the last two positives. One, the XP rewards for big team mode are great. This is the sort of thing that I don't normally care about in a game, but I think they've done something really clever here. When you end a multiplayer game, the big team mode game, there's sort of 4 pots of XP you can get, and they're all capped. One of them is for combat, so like kills and assists and stuff. One of them is for objectives, so capturing points or defending them. One of them is for recon, so using the abilities that help you to tag enemies or pointing out where enemies are. And one of them is for support, so healing players, reviving players, dropping ammo, that sort of thing. It encourages players to be team players, because there's going to be loads of people who want to level up as quickly as possible. And with this system, if you just get kills and nothing else, so you're one of those Battlefield players that sits at the back of the map with a sniper rifle and just gets loads of kills, you'll only be able to get a quarter of the available XP. But if you actually push on and get objectives, that's another quarter. If you are willing to use some of the support abilities, that gives you another quarter. And if you're willing to use some of the recon abilities, that's another quarter. I think that's a genius idea. It means that the best way to play the game is also probably the best thing for your team, and that's for you to do a bit of everything. Then the final positive I want to talk about in this video, the economy. The economy in the extraction mode is great. Money is important and all different kinds of loot are super valuable. You know, there's some weapon attachments that are worth like 100 grand. Some of the ammo is insanely expensive. So it makes you want to try and earn more money in the game so you can end up getting that stuff. The auction house is super interesting where you can put stuff up for sale for other players and then they can buy it. I think that'll be an interesting thing once lots more people are playing. And it's a kind of a little side game that you could play that might make you rich if you have the right things at the right time. Like, you know, you blast ahead with the missions and find out that this one mission needs a certain type of object. If you can craft those objects or you know where to find them, you could stockpile a bunch and then just put them all up for increasing amounts of money and make an absolute killing because you know people will be blasting through the missions and will just buy it because it's convenient. So let's start talking about some of the bad things in this game, some of the things that aren't so fun. So the first one for this is the crossover between the big team mode and the extraction shooter. Now, I really don't like it when a game just tries to make every system tie into every other system. This led to super bland gameplay in Call of Duty, and I think a lot of the reasons I'm not a big fan of Call of Duty right now is because they've tried to make, you know, MWZ and DMZ and multiplayer and Warzone and the campaign, they've tried to make them use as many of the same assets as possible, they've tried to make them all share progression, they've tried to make them all kind of use the same mechanics, and it just makes all of them a little bit worse. I really hope they don't make the same mistakes in this game. The operators are the kind of the big standout thing with this, where all of the abilities the operators have are the same whether you're playing the big team battle or the extraction mode. So we were having a conversation in chat today where someone was saying about how the healing character can throw a smoke grenade and then fire a healing dart into it and then heal everyone in the smoke. That's super useful in big team battle where you might have like 7 people in that smoke. You wouldn't be able to heal them all individually, but you can kind of heal a choke point that everyone's passing through, and then that's super useful. In the extraction mode, in hazard operations, where you only have 3 people on your team, that's not useful at all because the healing gun just has enough ammo that you can just shoot each person individually with that. So it doesn't make a lot of sense. I think it would be better if maybe they kind of tweaked all of the abilities so they had the same kind of general idea, but it was more useful for the extraction mode and more useful for the big team battle because they were slightly different. So maybe the healing person in the extraction mode could do something like putting something down cooldown in an area that would keep people healing over a long time. So if you were camping a little bit, or maybe holding it back for a sniper that you're not going to be able to get back to, that would heal them. Something like that might be useful. Something that might be overpowered in the big team battle mode, but would work really well in the extraction mode. One thing I do like in regards to this is that the progression seems pretty much separate. So you level up guns and everything just in the big team battle mode. You can't do that in the extraction mode. And they seem to have their own kind of leveling system and rank system and everything like that. I think that's really good, because otherwise you end up with people just finding the most efficient way to level up, and then they just go in that mode to do that. Think of Call of Duty and the way people just use plunder to level up guns, or they just go on shipment 2047 to get challenges done. And it sort of ruins those game modes, because there's always so many people that don't care about what the actual objective of the game is. They're just there to complete their own little objectives. And that kind of sucks. It kind of ruins those game modes. So thankfully, they don't seem to be doing that in Delta Force. My second negative thing is that the extraction mode missions are dull so far. I did a stream the other day and I put the title as something like, we're doing the hard missions now, you know, we're getting on to the later missions. And then I started doing some of those missions and it was like, oh, these are exactly the same as the earlier missions I was doing. All of the missions seem to be some sort of variation of go and interact with these things on the map, or go kill enemies in this area, go collect some of these items and find them, or build this gun with these attachments. And they don't seem to be changing very much. Like I said, I'd put about 25 hours into the extraction mode, and I still haven't seen any more interesting missions. DMZ suffered from this a little bit. They had a couple of more interesting missions, but they were kind of few and far between, like that one where you had to take the GPS tracker to every POI in Al Mazrah, or that one where you had to go pick up the bomb and then put it in the embassy before it exploded. Stuff like that was a bit more interesting, and I really hope that they managed to come up with some more interesting missions in Delta Force. This kind of killed Grey Zone Warfare for me. Like, the first area in Grey Zone Warfare had some quite interesting missions, and then you went to the second area and it was all things like get so many kills, find these items, kill the boss. And then you go to the next area and it's like, get so many kills, find these items, kill the boss. And then you go to the next area and it's the same thing. Obviously, Grey Zone Warfare isn't finished, it's an early access thing still, but I just really hope that Delta Force managed to find some ways to change up the way missions work, and just make you do some more interesting things in games. My third big negative, and this is something that I complain about with nearly every modern FPS, except for Grey Zone Warfare actually, and that's that the guns are just too accurate. Right now, if you use the gunsmith and you start putting a load of attachments on that reduce your sort of recoil, so you add more control to them, the guns are just so insanely accurate that they're just laser beams. You know, you can challenge sniper rifles easily with an assault rifle. I always thought this was a big problem in Call of Duty, that basically every gun could be, you know, almost perfect, and then it was just picking the gun that did the most damage. And I think that really sucks. I much prefer games where the guns have a ton of recoil, you know, where firing an assault rifle on full auto is basically always a terrible idea. And then it means that, you know, SMGs have a bit more of a purpose because you can control them a bit on full auto, admittedly at a shorter range. And then marksman rifles are more useful because if you want to fight something at a longer range, you can do that, and assault rifles kind of fall somewhere in the middle. I think that's a really good way of balancing guns and making every attachment have some severe negatives. You know, every extra thing you add onto a gun should probably make it a little bit more cumbersome to use, should probably make it a bit more awkward. At least in the extraction mode, that makes the gun more expensive. You know, if you want to make guns that don't have any recoil and have big magazines, that gun is now going to be a bit of a liability. It's going to be super expensive, so that kind of balances itself out a little bit. But in the big team battle mode, then it doesn't work like that at all. You know, you can just put whatever attachments you want on it, and you can make some guns absolutely ridiculously accurate, to the point where they're just too easy to use, and it's like, why would you use anything other than the assault rifles? Hopefully they'll just add things like maybe adding a lot more weight to the guns when you add a lot of attachments on, maybe adding a bunch of recoil so they're much harder to use if you're using them in full auto. I don't always want games to be super realistic, but I think a touch of realism with these guns would probably be a good thing and probably be more beneficial for the game. You know, it means you'd get shot a little bit less by people from a long way away with an assault rifle who absolutely beam you, and it means sniper rifles and marksman rifles would maybe be a little bit more useful, you know, at the expense of having a big, heavy, incredibly expensive weapon in your second slot. Now, my penultimate negative is that the matchmaking for the extraction mode needs to be improved. Now, obviously, in the technical test, they couldn't really do this. There wasn't many people playing. Like I said, I think there was like 30 people playing today, so they couldn't really do matchmaking. They just had to throw everyone in together. But when this game hits the alpha and there's thousands of people playing or hundreds of thousands of people playing, they need to find a way to match you up against other people who you're going to have a good game against. It absolutely sucks because of the sort of ammo types and the armor types and all stuff like that, that you could go in and take in some of the most expensive gear you have. You could have purple armor, take in some purple ammo, take in some guns with loads of modifications, and then you could get absolutely annihilated in a split second by somebody who just happens to have gold bullets in their gun. And you have no idea of knowing if someone has that. You know, when you see someone in distance shooting, you have no idea what kind of ammunition they're using or what kind of armor they have on. You know, until maybe if you get a lot closer, you'll be able to tell what armor they've got on. But in all the time that I've been playing, I don't think I've ever been in a gunfight where I've looked at the other person and been able to think, oh, they've got green armor on or they've got blue armor on. I think the solution for this is to try and separate people by gear score. So if you go in with essentially nothing, you'll be up against other players who have essentially nothing. And then obviously it'll still be harder because you'll be fighting the bots, etc., and they're still pretty strong. And then when you're getting kills against other players, you won't be gaining that much. You know, you won't be getting the best gear. You'll be trying to get gear off the map instead. And then if you go in with really good gear, maybe you'll be up against other players with really good gear. So it's still a bit of a challenge. You're still going to have a bit of danger because other players are having really good gear, but you're not going to come up against people with the very best gear, and you're also not going to be coming up against people who don't stand a chance against you. And then you've got the benefit of, if you kill a player, you're going to get better rewards. You're going to get some of their guns, some of their expensive stuff. And then if you have the absolute best stuff possible, you should be playing games against other people who have the best stuff possible. So you still have a challenge. You'll be able to kill the bots and everything like that super easily and all the bosses, but other players should still be a threat. And then you've got the biggest reward of, if you do manage to kill another player, you're going to get absolutely tons of like rewards. You're going to get tons of money, or you're going to get tons of high level items. So that means that you'd still have that curve of progression of, there's still a reason to take better gear in, but you're aware that the better the gear you take in, the harder the fights against other players are going to be. And then it would kind of separate some of the best players from some of the worst players, kind of naturally, without needing to worry about skill-based matchmaking or anything like that. And now, my final complaint about this game is crafting timers. This is something I only noticed today, that I went to go craft a new rig because I'd lost mine after I died. It only needed one plank of wood, so I thought, that's pretty good to be able to make a blue rig, so lots of pockets to put ammo in and healing stuff. And it was going to take 3 days to complete, 72 hours. That's absolutely insane. That's an incredibly long time. And not only is that just frustrating, because it meant, you know, I wanted to rig now, but I couldn't. I had to wait 3 days for it, which is going to go past the end of the test, which is a bit annoying. But also, it means that you can't do some of the cool things that I was expecting when I first saw the auction house. You couldn't set up a character where you're just going in, getting some resources, crafting them into items that people need, and then selling them, because there's a massive cooldown every time you want to make something. You can't queue them up or anything like that. You only get to make one of these every 3 days. And similarly, there's some other things where you can make it and you get it straight away. You sort of swap stuff with the vendors and you get the stuff straight away, but then you can't do that again for another day. Now, what I'm worried about is that they're going to start selling things to skip that timer. That this is a free-to-play game. I could easily imagine them being like, hey, if you get these tokens, that'll get rid of the timer, get rid of the cooldowns, then you can make another one of them. That would suck. Maybe there'll be a good way of doing it. Maybe they'll be able to reduce these timers by crafting better facilities at your base. That would be okay. That would be kind of cool. I just really don't like the idea of these long cooldown times at all. I'm not really sure what it's for, because you already have a kind of limit on how many of these things you can make. just by how many of these things you can loot, you know, how often you can go get those objects. If they want you to only make these things very rarely, just make it so it needs more resources, it needs more rare items to craft it. I don't see why we need a 3-day cooldown for me to be able to use a bit of wood to make a rig. I don't even know how you make a rig from a bit of wood. But anyway, it just seems silly to me. So there you have it. After 34 hours in game playing Delta Force Hawk Ops, those are my honest thoughts. I love this game. There's a ton of stuff I think is just amazing about this. There's a ton of stuff that I think makes it better than Call of Duty or Battlefield, which is pretty lofty praise for someone that has loved Battlefield and Call of Duty games for so long, for decades at this point. I think they've done an incredible job with it. I just kind of hope they tweak a few things and they avoid a few pitfalls, like some of the things that I've been talking about today. So if you've got any ideas, things that you've seen, things that you think differently to me, you got some arguments about stuff I've said, leave it in the comments below. And if you have any other questions about the game, leave them in the comments and I'll do my best to answer all of them. Don't forget to leave a like, it helps me out a bunch. Subscribe, and I'll see you for the next one. Goodbye.